quite different, but at certain stages of development they look quite similar. Here's a dolphin embryo, and you can see these hind limb buds emerging, and you can see here it's still present at this stage in development. Later on these buds regress back and are no longer present. And what's interesting is some developmental biologists have actually figured out some of the details of the gene regulation process that actually stops hind limb formation in dolphins. So it's new work. Okay. Another issue is to think about mammals. We have two nares, two nostrils, and those nostrils are on the front of our face, whereas whales have a single blowhole that's on the top of their heads. So the issue is, again, a rather uncomfortable prediction that evolutionary theory makes is that whales at one point had nostrils on the front of their face, but now have a single fused nostril on the top of their heads. Interestingly enough, in dolphin development, you can see that dolphins start off exactly like that, with a nose on the front of their face, with two nostrils, two nares. Later on in development, you can see that that has fused into a single blowhole, which is now more on the top of the head. Again, not knockdown, drag-out proof of anything, but we're accumulating lines of evidence. Okay, if you really want to bake your noodle, to use the matrix phraseology, earlier still in development, you can still find, as you can with all mammalian embryos, the remnants of what look like gills. These things called branchial slits, branchial arches. These get used developmentally in mammalian embryos to become different things. One of them becomes the aorta, for example, in mammals. But the point being made is that these are appearing at the same time, relatively, and in the same locations as what will become gill slits in fish. So here we have evidence for an aquatic lifestyle based on gills in a sea-dwelling mammal. Counterintuitive, but not completely unexpected, because we were originally hypothesizing, if you go back far enough, that whales are descended from fish. Again, not knockdown, drag-out proof, but suggested nonetheless. Okay, so continuing on, you might say, okay, fine. How is it that you can have a series of transitional forms where you have nose at the front that then becomes blowhole on top? Where are you going to find transitional forms that use air-based olfaction but no longer do? Where are you going to find transitional forms that once had hind limbs but now no longer have hind limbs? What good is half a hind limb? What's the series? How could you even hypothesize a series of transitional forms that would meet these criteria? Because remember, the prediction is seamless common descent. So the issue is, okay, there should be stuff in the fossil record that's suggestive, that lines up with these other lines of evidence. If it doesn't, well, then we might be in trouble, but if it does, that's adding a further line of evidence to our hypothesis. Okay, so are there temporally arranged forms in the fossil record that appear to satisfy these criteria? This is relatively recent work. Not much was known about this before about 1992 or so, and it sort of remained a bit of a mystery. It's like, okay, where are the transitional whales, as it were? Since that time, we've actually found quite a few. So we're going to start at the back. Again, remember, the prediction is that land-dwelling vertebrates are the ancestors of modern whales. Starting at the back, you can see hippos are proposed to be on this as well, that at some point the ancestors of modern whales and modern hippos shared a common ancestor that have since gone their separate ways. Pakicetus was found in Pakistan. That's why it gets its name. This is what it looks like, not a very aquatic-looking organism. However, based on a couple of lines of evidence, it suggests that it had a semi-aquatic lifestyle, based on the types of radioisotopes that you find in its bones. Seems suggestive that it was at least partially foraging and living in the water. Again, not knockdown, drag-out proof, but it's in the right time, at the right place. A little further on, we get something called ambulocetus. Ambulocetus simply means walking whale. Cetus meaning whale, ambulatory, walking. So here's what it looks like. Notice that we have, like any good tetrapod, we have a hip bone with hind limbs attached. However, the hands or fingers are splaying more. Again, not knockdown, drag-out proof that this is an ancestral whale, but more and more suggestive. It's in the right time and in the right place. The other interesting thing to note is that we've got the nares, the nostrils, are at the front of the face. Okay, they're at the tip of the nose. Okay. Later on, we end up with something that are called protocetids. So proto just meaning before whales. Okay? And what you can see what's happened here is we now have a continuous backbone. The hips are actually not an integral part of the backbone. They're now decoupled, yet we still have fully functional hind limbs. Okay? Moving on further, you can see that, yep, nares at the front, nostrils at the front of the skull. Okay? That brings us on, oh, and then the point to make is that the ankles still retain the characteristics of what are called artiodactyls. So that's hypothesized to be the ancestral group that they come from. Hippos also being in that group. Here's something called a basilisaurid. It's called a basilisaurid because it was originally thought to be a reptile, but it's now known, has been known for a long, long time that it's actually a mammal. And what you can see here is we've got a complete loss of hind limbs. We've got a backbone that has extra vertebrae. And what's interesting here is that the nostrils are partially back on the skull. So they're no longer at the tip, they're partially back. Okay? And we're at a point where we have fully atrophied legs, so there is still some bone that is made here, but it's not connected to any other part of the skeleton. If you've ever seen a whale skeleton in a museum, you can see, even in modern whales, that they still generate a little bit of bone back in that area. And it is used as an attachment point for certain muscles, but it's obviously no longer functioning as a hind limb. Okay. What's interesting, in this atrophied leg, which is no longer connected to anything, the ankles still resemble the ancestral artiodactyl. Okay. Now, getting on to living cetacea, dolphins, porpoises, and whales, you can see that we have complete loss of hind limbs, completely. Although what's interesting, there are rare examples of cetaceans, such as dolphins, that have been caught that actually have 4 flippers. They're very rare, but and it's hypothesized that some sort of mutation is reactivating some sort of ancestral developmental program that's not shutting down that development during embryogenesis. All right, so what we have, again, science doesn't deal in absolutes, not knockdown, drag-out proof, but we have converging lines of evidence from several independent fields which are supporting the same hypothesis. So we have DNA sequencing, remnants of genes that look like they are terrestrial genes. We have a fossil record that seems to suggest a series of transitional forms. We have embryology, development of modern cetaceans that seems to, in some ways, line up with what we're seeing in the fossil record. Nair starting at the tip, then moving back, and hind limbs, buds being made and then regressing. Okay? We haven't talked about comparative anatomy and physiology, but the point to make here is this is the original line of evidence that originally was used to base the predictions for all the others. Originally, dolphins and whales were classified as mammals because they make milk, they nurse their young, that type of thing. So it's that comparative anatomy and physiology that first put them into the mammalian group. Okay. Any questions at that point? That's a whirlwind tour so far. Any technical questions?
Why was the hippo so far up on that chain?
Okay.
It's existing from?
What those lengths are suggesting on that is basically number of generations since they parted ways from their common ancestor. So it's an approximate